If you had that much damage to equipment while you're out on the lunar surface, it would be recorded in the audio, it
Yeah,
would be recorded in the written transcript. The damage that occurred, they're going to sit back and they're going to report on how much equipment was damaged.
of course they are. Yeah. One of the main things they would do is to report damage to equipment.
And then Houston is going to have to give them, every 5 minutes, going to tell them what time of day it is because he no longer has a watch. He can't look at his own oxygen. He has no idea how much oxygen he has left. That gauge is on the top of the OPS pack at the back. He has to get his buddy to look at it to see how much oxygen he's got left. He has a pressure gauge for his suit on his wrist to show how much pressure's in the suit. But the remaining oxygen in the tank is up on the OPS pack. So what happens if his partner dies? He's left alone. He's out on the rover. He loses communications with Houston. He needs that watch. He needs to know how much oxygen's in there. And if his rover's disabled, the rover was giving the GPS to show where the LEM is. So how's he going to operate without a compass? A lot of little things they missed out on when they were doing the simulation.
It's because the script they were following didn't include any of that.
And you can't think of everything when you're fantasizing.
What is interesting is the difference between what you've identified on the official record and compared it to what happened in reality.
Or what's in the photograph.
Yeah, in the photographs. And the photographs do not show a lot of the information that the official record shows. It's only when you compare the official record to what the photographs record can you see the discrepancies. And there are huge discrepancies. And if the whole thing was being conducted at Flagstaff on Cinder Lake, or wherever it was being done, it was deliberately created to represent the lunar surface so they could practice on it, which is fine. No problem with that. But let's get it correct. Now, could the fact that Apollo had so many problems that we've identified, you've identified many of them, and could confirm them from the photographic record, which we're told is the official record of the lunar landings, the photographic record, which of course is a bit of a problem in itself because photographic film is damaged in a vacuum, but of course it's not damaged at Flagstaff, even though Flagstaff is 5,000 feet above sea level, but it's not high enough to affect photographic film. So if you photograph everything at Flagstaff, yes, the photographs will come out all lovely and you'll see all these things. Photograph it on the moon, different story, which we've now confirmed that photographic film is damaged in a vacuum. At the very least, the color balance of the film is affected.
Considering the fact of the official documentation of where the batteries and magazines were stored, and people say, oh, it was only out for a short time. Well, unfortunately, all of the equipment, when you open the door up, is in a vacuum.
Yeah, immediately.
And if you're gone for 8 hours, then it doesn't get repressurized for that entire length of time either. So they say, oh, well, they took the magazines off and put them back in the LEM. Well, that's the same as being outside.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what people don't get.
No.
And then, of course, the film on the CSM that was taking the orbital shots there, right? That stuff is loaded there from launch.
Yeah. So it's in a vacuum from the time they get into space.
And no protection, right through the Van Allen belts. Absolutely no way that would survive, any of it.
So come on, you guys who know all about Apollo, you NASA employees who've read the documentation, explain these things. Show us we're wrong. Prove us wrong. Come on, that's what you're here for. What we're here for is to ask questions. How did this happen? Which we do. Nobody ever seems to want to reply to them or even appear with us on Skype to comment on what we say. Prove us wrong.
Yeah, it's funny, the fact that I was watching a short on Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he goes, I can settle this in 1 minute, whether we went to the moon. We didn't go there for this, or we didn't go there for moon samples or anything else, he said. And he pulls up the Apollo 8 Earthrise shot, and he said, this is what we need to look at. It showed us what a fragile ball we are in space. It showed us the world as we should see it. And then it created all of the interest in protecting our planet with the environmentalists and everything else. That's the main purpose of the moonshot. That's the best new excuse I've ever heard. He's quite creative. He's intelligent, but it's the first time he actually tried to answer a question about whether the moon landing was fake or not. He just goes right off topic. And it's probably one of the best excuses I've ever heard him do. I congratulate him on his ingenuity in creating these things. I'd like to see him get on here and answer me just about that wet flag.
Well, guess what, Scott? He won't appear because he doesn't have the answer.
He wants $150,000 to jump on Skype for 30 minutes. But I'd like to see him answer that question. I'd like to see how creative he is.
Oh, yeah, he would be. He'd be very creative.
If he has seen the wet flag, he's probably still thinking up the answer right now. Pretty sure it would stump him.
You see, it's interesting how often we get individually attacked, not on what we've said, but on the fact that we are here saying it. They never seem to answer the questions we ask. And they're quite legitimate questions. Anybody with an interest in space travel would say, yeah, that's a good question. What's the answer? But they don't answer them. Because if they did answer them honestly, the whole Apollo story would fall apart under weight of its own contradictions.
Exactly.
So they don't dare do it until NASA or SpaceX demonstrate that getting to the moon, landing humans on it, and returning them safely to the Earth is a very, very hard thing to do. We haven't done it yet.
You see, my answer to somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's going, well, that's why we went to the moon, so we could see how fragile the Earth is.
Yes.
And then we need to protect it. My answer to that is we're not getting off this planet, so we better protect it.
Exactly.
We're not getting off of here. This is the only thing we have that's keeping us alive. We've got, 10 miles of atmosphere that's actually that we're viable to live in, that's keeping us alive. We've got the electromagnetic shield around us that's protecting us, and that anything coming in from outer space could simply wipe us out, and has nearly wiped the planet off for extinction, documented several times that we're aware of.
Yeah, 9,600 years ago was the last time we got hit.
Well, I mean, everybody knows the extinction of the dinosaurs. And of course, you can literally get on Google Earth and see where it hit in Hudson's Bay. It's about 300 miles across.
It's big.
The evidence is there. It shows you the history of the Earth as far as we can see it. But quite literally, as a civilization, we need to protect our consumables. No different than NASA. If you're actually in a rocket, you're going to have to protect your consumables. And we don't see that in Apollo.
Because they hadn't thought of that. They hadn't worked it out. We've had 50 years of looking at this information. We've had 50 years of questioning it. Well, I have. And we haven't got the answers yet. And they're still trying to get back to the moon. They're trying to put humans back on the moon. It's going to be December 2025? About 2 years away. That's not going to happen. They can't even get the rocket off the ground yet. Keep it in one piece for a couple of minutes. It's very sad because they're building up our hopes, keep referring back to Apollo. Now, if Apollo never happened, they can't refer back to it because it doesn't record real events, records fictionalized events, fraudulent, fakery. That's what it records. So if people are assuming Apollo is the way forward, they're very much mistaken, which they're beginning to find out. I mean, Musk launching his rockets and them creatively reassembling themselves about 2 minutes into the flight is not a good start.
Exactly. The thing is if Apollo didn't work, which it didn't, just take one technical thing, like these rocket engines aren't going to get us anywhere. They're not the right type of mechanism, propellant or anything else to use there. The weight penalty to having liquid fuel is far too great to have any achievable results. If that became a fact, then all of this other stuff and all the other money that's being put into these other programs that are using the same type of rocket fuel or propulsion system is a complete waste. Can't admit to that either. But we don't have anything else.
Not at the moment.
All of the little, ion systems and, all of the other drive system is all fine and dandy. And I looked at the ion systems that they were looking at. The amount of power it takes to get like 25 pounds of thrust is unbelievable. You need a nuclear power plant behind it to build into these things, to put the power out to do it. And it's a continuous thrust. That's what you get with an ion technology.
Yeah.
But there's also one of the ion technologies I was looking at doesn't work in space. It only works within an atmosphere.
Oh, God, that's a problem.
That's a problem. You need to have molecules there to work with. How then do you take that to space? And then all of a sudden, oh, yeah, it works in space too. Well, I couldn't find any documentation on that either.
No, they just say it.
And it's quite interesting when you get into these different types of things, right? And then, of course, you get the boys jump in there and they come up with these things that are completely over unity. And these slingshot effects off of planets to gain speed. Well, I'm sorry. You have to turn the gravitational pull down once you go past it to get the slingshot effect out of it, right? It really doesn't work. You can, for a very small of an effect between the Earth and the Moon, because the Moon moves away and around like as you're rotating, right? So you're coming into contact with it on a cyclical thing, the difference in the gravitational pull. It's not that big of an effect. You might have to be doing that for months to pick the speed up, right? It's just not going to happen overnight. You're not going to get that slingshot effect off of it. And I do understand that between two orbital bodies that you can get that slingshot effect, and it's quite technical. The guy that wrote the paper on it, I think he got a Nobel Prize for it or something, that wrote the whole thing on the slingshot effect. It doesn't work when you go out there because you constantly have the sun's gravity as you're going away. It's always there all the time. So you can't just sit there and say, oh, I'm going to float freely between here and Saturn. And then I'm going to get a slingshot effect off of Saturn. Yeah. Because the sun is still that direct pull all the time as you're leaving everything else. And now we're back to Voyager 2.
And also, if you've got your slingshot effect, you're attracted by the gravity of whatever planet is you're slingshotting past. But you're also affected by the gravity as you go away from it. So it cancels out. Conservation of energy is one of the basic laws of physics.
Yeah, but if you have that secondary orbital body out there, if you're going by slingshotting into the Earth and the moon's out there on the far side, you pick up that little bit of difference from the gravitational pull of the moon.
It's a very little bit.
Well, it's the same as us having a full moon here that affects the tides. That's where the whole theory comes from. The difference you get in the tidal flow when you're dealing with a full moon, you get that higher tide. That's the difference in the pull, where they're getting that slingshot effect from. But you can't get a slingshot effect between here and Saturn because the sun's going to stop you.
The sun's got the big gravity.
Well, it's able to pull Halley's Comet back every 75 years or so.
Keeps all the other planets orbiting around it.
It can't seem to escape, and it's traveling a lot faster than our satellites are.
Oh, yeah, it is.
What I wish to talk about is the rungs are 8 inches apart, right? So you go 2-3 rungs up and you measure it down, right? You should have 24 inches.
Yep.
And you bring it down to there, that's 24 inches, right down to the bottom of the leg. Is the equivalent distance of 3 rungs. But that distance is supposed to be 32 inches. That's the compression of the leg. So here they're saying Buzz Aldrin's 5'8". There's the 8 inches right there. And if you take this one, 1, 2, and 3, and measure it down to there and bring it down, it comes down to there, just at his knee. This leg is 4 rungs in distance, not 3. So it is the 32 inches. Down to there, and you bring that down, that's the 32 inches down. The rungs being 8 inches apart, that's 4 rungs. It's 32. So this leg is longer in this photograph than in the other photograph. That's number 1.
Right.
So that's a difference of 8 inches in the length of this leg compared to this leg down.
Yeah, I see.
This leg is 8 inches shorter from here down than the other leg. So when he's standing here, he's looking and he's going, well, this is where it attaches in, and this is the height of the guy, and we just assume he's 6 feet high because you can measure him off the thing. He's fairly close to 6 feet high. But you can see it comes in just almost at his hand, just below his crotch. There on the thing, we can measure this down. It's 24 inches down in this photograph. And when you come to this one, it's 32 inches down.
On that photograph, where is the bottom rung? Is it where your pointer is now?
Yeah.
That's where the bottom rung is.
Yeah. And the leg is supposed to have 32 inches of travel for compression.
Yeah, that's true. Yep. Okay.
And we can see that it's 32 inches from here down using the 8 inches of the step. We can see where it's attached there. His knees are bent and you can see his head height sitting there on the thing. So then when you come back to the article and he's going, oh, this actor is only 5 feet tall based on this height here. And this leg is already 8 inches shorter than the leg on this leg is 8 inches longer. And Buzz Aldrin is 5'8". And he's saying that the actor is only 5 feet tall because of where his head comes up here against where the flag is mounted. That's the whole purpose of this article, is to say that they're using midget dwarf actors to shoot this scene.
In those photographs there with the NASA chappie standing next to it, the leg is much shorter in that picture there.
Yeah, well, we just measured that.
Yeah, now that bottom rung is more or less level with his crotch, okay?
Yeah.
Because Buzz Aldrin had his feet bent and he was standing inside that. So if that is the bottom rung there.
There's his waist there, he's bent. But if he came off of that and he was standing down on the ground, and this isn't perfectly level ground, you can see the difference. Like this article is about the astronaut being 8 inches shorter in stature. And you can measure it between this part of the leg and this part of the leg. There's 8 inches difference right there. And the whole article is based on this photograph, on the height that appears, his head appearing the height where it mounts in as compared to the height where it's mounted in here. And that's not taking into account, that's the flag holder right there. That's the top of it there, and that's the top of it mounted in there. And that's what the whole article is based on. But you've already got 8 inches difference in the leg height between this leg height and that leg height.
Yes, you have. Yeah.
I can't imagine when you are under a very restricted time frame to put together a moon landing in such a short order that you would have to manufacture spacesuits for midgets.
Yes, you would. Yeah.
And all of the astronauts that were selected, all 60 astronauts, they were within a range of an inch or so of 5'10" and 180 pounds.
Yeah, that's true. They were.
They were all selected for that. And Buzz Aldrin being the shortest one of the bunch. And the only thing they would have to modify on the suit would be for the gloves and their feet. That's about it, right?
Yeah.
The size of the feet. The suits are all basically the same. I'll use another example of now we have a problem with the camera itself. This is the salute. Now, given the fact that this man refused to put his hand on a Bible, he also did not salute the American flag. This picture appears that he's saluting the American flag. There's his fingers right there. But he's not facing the American flag. The American flag is to his right. He is not actually facing the American flag. And I'm going to show you that. Because here's the American flag. This pole is 8 feet high. And I measured that because that's 3 feet. The flag is 3 by 5 officially. So when you measure that down, this pole in the ground, stuck in the ground, is 8 feet tall. Bring it over to here, and your astronaut is almost 9 feet tall. So he's that much closer to the camera. So that flag is to the right. He intentionally is not saluting the flag because he intentionally did not put his hand on a Bible. How do you like that?
Interesting.
And of course, the shadow of the flag, you can just see the trace of the shadow of the flag is there to his right.
Yeah, it's not very far from him.
Yeah, but he's standing closer to the camera and he's facing to the left. So he's not actually looking at the flag. So he's not actually saluting the flag because it's to his right. And that's why he's over 8 feet tall. And that's just a matter of perspective of the camera, right? What the camera's doing. So you have the same perspective when he's coming down the ladder and they're taking the video shot of him. He appears to be shorter because of the perspective that's being shot with the thing. This is just another example of it. Then you take another example of him there and you measure him for height there and you bring it over, and now he's only 4 feet tall, right? Like he only comes up to there. That's 32 inches down, right? Now he's only 4 feet tall.
Are you taking it from the point at which the struts intersect?
Yeah, well, that's 32 inches up to the base of the secondary strut. But that's the height of him in the photograph. That's his height there, and you bring it over to there. And that's just a difference in perspective.
Yes, it will be.
And that's exactly what you're seeing here. The whole article is based on the height of this guy standing in respect to where the flag mount is.
Yeah, it's fairly obvious that that point there is much higher in the photographs. In the photographs, the bottom or the lower of the rungs appears to be about here, where the second rung is.
Yeah, in another shot, the astronauts are just here. They're about 8 inches below all the time when they're standing up around. When you look at the other photographs in the Apollo 11, you can take anywhere from that photograph on, right? And the other ones when you come through. Now, yeah. How tall is he there? Because he's standing in front. You measured up, and now he's this tall. He's actually to the same height as the ladder is over here. All just a matter of perspective. And the other thing is, how do you compare something when it's not on level ground?
Exactly, yeah.
Every time you take a shot, you can see the variance in the height. Here was Buzz was just standing over here in the other picture, right? And he only appeared to come just a little bit above the thing. Then you have, this is the only shot of Neil.
Yeah, it's the only one of Neil.
Yeah, and here he is at quite a different height in comparison to that leg. And I mean, it's just perspective of the camera.
What make that much difference? Yeah, it will make a difference, but not significant.
Right, and if you take the 8 inches difference in the two legs being displayed in that article, and you got a 5'8" astronaut, and you take that 8 inches difference, now he's 5 feet tall. But the leg itself is where the difference is. It's not the astronaut, it's the leg.
That's true. Yeah, it's a good point.
This particular photograph, Robert and I were discussing if that's actually the side of a light bulb putting down the hot spot on the ground here. They actually got a picture of the bulb, because there's absolutely nothing on the lem that sticks out that far.
Let's open up first with gigaparsecs. What is he claiming?
He's claiming that I'm wrong in the timeline in which I described the mission to happen. He doesn't believe that the American people would be interested in erecting the American flag and saluting it after they came down off the EV-1. He's content to state that they weren't interested in that. They were not interested in setting up the experimental equipment. However, logically, the American people would want to see the astronauts salute the American flag. That's number one on their list. And nobody can deny that they do not run around and wave American flags. That's the biggest thing they've got. They've got American flags on their suits. They got American flags all over the equipment. They got it all over the outside of the craft. And they are, of course, going to set up and salute that American flag. However, that's not what happened in Apollo 15. The other thing that would be the most important thing is you were on the lunar surface, and it's quite possible that the time that you're going to be able to be there would be cut short because of equipment failure or anything else. The first and most important thing that you're going to do is set up that experimental equipment, because it will remain there and keep working, as NASA claims, for years afterwards, collecting data. So it's number one in importance for the entire mission is to get that equipment set up first. That did not happen in Apollo 15. Not only that, all of the other missions, they rested before they landed. So if you're just flying in space, traveling there, you're going to have lots of time to eat and get some sleep before you do your final landing, which means you don't need to eat and go to sleep after you land, because you did that just before you did your descent. You were all rested up. Apollo 15 is different than all the rest of them because of those factors. They came down, they did a stand-up EVA, which lasted about 30 minutes. Then they closed the hatch off, got something to eat, and slept for about 6 hours. They get up, they jump on the rover, and they take off on EVA 1 and come back, get back in the LEM, eat and sleep, then get up and jump on the rover for a second time and do EVA 2 for about 6 hours, at which point they come back, set up the all set equipment, the experimental equipment is all set up, and they set the flag up and take their photo shoot at the end of EVA 2. That is not logical. It does not follow any other format from any of the other missions. And because it's critical that this stuff be set up, there's no way that would happen. The American flag is the most critical thing that the American people do. If they can't plant that flag and salute it for the media, the very first thing when they come out, that's just simply not logical.
Before we go any further, gigaparsecs has a problem. And that problem is we're discussing the launch dates. So now we go to July 26, 1971, window of opportunity, 9:34 in the morning. Let's go to the last window of opportunity, which was September the 24th, 1971, 8:33 a.m. Here's the problem with this. If you take off at a different date than you're going to leave and arrive at the moon, all those cuff checklists were already produced 3-4 months in advance of this. So when they get there, it could be if they left on July or if they left on September. You have to pick the date here because you only have one set of cuff checklists. You can't change them now. They're already made. So which date are you going to take off on? They had another one, for example, August the 25th, 1971. Well, that means now you would have to make up 3 sets of cuff checklists, which they did not do. Nothing will make sense. It will not add up. And that's why we have all these different discrepancies here.
That's right. You have a half a dozen different landing locations. Because of the position of the moon, when you're taking off in these launch windows, you're not necessarily going to be able to land at Hadley Rill. Even if you're off by an hour in your launch time in those windows, you're likely not going to be able to land in the location. And that's why they have a half a dozen different landing locations for them to go to. However, the cuff checklists, the stations that are laid out are on there, and the timeline in the cuff checklist is already predetermined and written for them to do. Anybody that thinks that they can follow this right to the minute, and when we go down page 21 of the press kit, or if you're in Adobe, it's page 24, starts the event times on here, and it's showing the ground estimated time. That's from launch, the number of hours is going in there, but it actually includes the dates here for the estimated time on it. So it starts July 30th, and it's right down to the minute, the timing. At 7:44 p.m., they do the stand-up EVA. How can that be in the press kit when the press kit is released months before launch? The only way that could be there is if they've already finished the mission, they've done all the simulations, they've done all the faking, everything else, and then prepared this document. It can't be the other way around. You can't be to the minute to follow this. Nobody went to the moon ahead of them and laid out all the stations for them. It's quite simply as that. As you go through and you read this, you are going to see the amount of detail that is described in each one of these timelines.
And then when we get to page 27, we look at the events. Arrive at stop area 5-6 on crater rim, slope, samples, photos, soil mechanics, and trench. Then we get to the next one. Arrive at stop 7, secondary crater cluster near 400 meters crater, collect documented samples, Oh, wait a minute. collected documented samples.
Documented.
Yeah, how can you collect documented samples when you have not been there before to collect those samples in the first place?
Well, that means that NASA already had these samples and had written the entire description, have analyzed them, written the documentation on them, and then laid them out on a fake lunar set for the astronauts to collect. Anyway, as anyone can see in these PDF documents that NASA has produced, these impossible timelines right down to the minute, you couldn't reproduce that. Even on a set, you couldn't go back and copy this if you were on a movie set and you had a guy with a stopwatch. Any little thing would happen, and you're not going to be on that timeline. Some little thing, you need to adjust the guy's makeup, and you're going to lose a couple of minutes. That's on a movie set. This is on the lunar surface, and they've got it right down to the minute. Not only the overall time, the ground elapsed time, but the actual date, time, and right down to the minute to follow it. And that goes through everything from launch to splashdown, is right down to the minute on every one of these missions. And I do believe we had discussed this once before a few years ago. But when people start bringing it up in the comments and say, what's wrong with that? This is what's wrong with it.